He thought my login was his shortcut to success. Instead, it became his road to destruction. At exactly 8:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning, Marcus Webb used my stolen credentials to access what he believed were my most valuable analysis files. What he actually opened were 6 carefully crafted weapons, each designed to detonate exactly when he needed them most. By 2:15 p.m., his $37 million deal was dead, his reputation was in ruins, and I was sitting in the front row watching it all unfold. My name is Elena Santos, and this is the story of how corporate greed met corporate justice, one dummy file at a time. I've been a senior data analyst at Meridian Consulting for 8 years. At 38, I'm the kind of professional who arrives early, stays late, and delivers results that make executives look good while they take the credit. I wear my competence like armor in a world where politics often matters more than performance. My corner cubicle on the 15th floor might not have a view, but it has something more valuable: proximity to everything that matters. Meridian Consulting specializes in market analysis for Fortune 500 companies. We're the people they call when they need to understand whether a merger makes sense, whether a product launch will succeed, or whether an investment will pay off. My particular expertise is in predictive modeling and data visualization. I can take raw numbers and transform them into stories that drive million-dollar decisions. The trouble started 6 months ago when Marcus Webb joined our team. 34 years old, Harvard MBA, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having faced real consequences. He had perfect teeth, expensive suits, and a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel predatory. His official title was Senior Account Manager, but what he really specialized in was identifying other people's work and claiming it as his own strategic insight. Marcus had a particular talent for hovering. He'd appear at my desk precisely when I was reviewing complex datasets, asking questions that sounded casual but felt calculated. Interesting approach, Elena. How did you develop this model? These visualizations are compelling. What data sources are you using? This analysis could really drive client value. Mind if I review the methodology? At first, I assumed he was just being thorough. Collaboration was encouraged at Meridian, and sharing insights across teams was supposedly part of our culture. But I started noticing patterns. My analytical frameworks would appear in his client presentations, slightly modified but unmistakably mine. My data visualizations would show up in his quarterly reviews, credited as collaborative efforts led by Marcus Webb. My predictive models would be presented to senior management as examples of his innovative thinking. The breaking point came during the Pinnacle Industries analysis. Pinnacle was considering a $2.8 billion acquisition, and they needed comprehensive market modeling to justify the investment. It was exactly the kind of complex, high-stakes project that had built my reputation at Meridian. I spent 3 weeks developing a multi-layered analysis that examined market trends, competitive positioning, financial projections, and risk assessments. My models showed that the acquisition would likely fail. The target company's market share was artificially inflated by temporary factors, their customer base was more volatile than apparent, and their technology was becoming obsolete faster than their management admitted. It was a $2.8 billion mistake waiting to happen, and my data proved it conclusively. I presented my preliminary findings to our internal team on a Tuesday morning. Marcus was there, taking notes with unusual intensity. He asked detailed questions about my methodology, requested copies of my working files for deeper review, and suggested we schedule follow-up sessions to refine the strategic messaging. 2 days later, I learned that Marcus had presented my analysis to Pinnacle's board, with one crucial modification. According to his version, the acquisition was a strong strategic move that would drive significant value. He'd taken my models, inverted my conclusions, and presented them as his own breakthrough insight. Pinnacle's executives were impressed enough to approve the deal based on Marcus's innovative analytical approach. When I confronted Marcus about the presentation, his response was perfectly calibrated corporate deflection. Elena, I think there might be some confusion. The Pinnacle analysis was a team effort with input from multiple sources. I synthesized various perspectives to develop a comprehensive strategic recommendation. Your data was certainly one component of that synthesis. He delivered this explanation with the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes, the kind that says, "What are you going to do about it?" Because what could I do? He was senior to me in the hierarchy. He had relationships with the C-suite that I'd never developed. And most importantly, he'd been careful to cover his tracks, claiming collaboration rather than theft, synthesis rather than plagiarism. But Marcus made one critical mistake. He underestimated exactly how thoroughly I understood our systems, our processes, and our vulnerabilities. because while he'd been perfecting his political skills, I'd been building something more valuable. Technical competence that went far beyond basic data analysis. Most people at Meridian saw me as a numbers person, skilled but narrow in scope. What they didn't realize was that my graduate work had been in information systems security. I understood not just how to analyze data, but how to control access to it, how to track usage patterns, and how to build protective measures that were invisible until activated. Over the past 3 years, I'd quietly been implementing what I called my insurance policy. Every sensitive file I created had embedded tracking protocols. Every model I developed included hidden verification layers. Every analysis I shared was tagged with digital fingerprints that could trace exactly who accessed what, when, and how. Marcus thought he was stealing my work. In reality, he was walking into a surveillance system that documented every theft in perfect detail. The morning Marcus used my login credentials, I was ready. I'd known for weeks that he was trying to gain access to my files. His questions had become more specific, his requests for collaboration more urgent. He'd started hanging around my workspace when I stepped away, allegedly just chatting with nearby colleagues, but always positioning himself where he could observe my screen. The previous Friday, I'd deliberately left my computer unlocked while I went to a meeting, knowing Marcus would be alone in our section. Hidden cameras I'd installed months earlier captured him photographing my screen, specifically the password recovery information displayed in my browser's saved credentials. He thought he was being subtle. He was actually being recorded in high definition. That weekend, I prepared my trap. 6 dummy files, each crafted with meticulous attention to believable detail. They looked exactly like the kind of high-value analysis that Marcus loved to steal, but each one contained fatal flaws that would only become apparent under scrutiny. File 1. Meridian Competitive Analysis Q3 Confidential. A seemingly comprehensive market study that actually used outdated data from 2019, presented as current. Any client who relied on it would be making decisions based on market conditions that no longer existed. File 2. Strategic Revenue Projections Executive Review. Beautiful charts showing growth trajectories that violated basic mathematical principles. The compound annual growth rates would require market expansion beyond physical possibility. File 3. Client Acquisition Cost Analysis Final. A model that calculated customer lifetime value using inverted formulas, making unprofitable customers appear highly valuable and vice versa. File 4. Industry Risk Assessment Framework. A risk analysis that systematically underestimated every major threat factor while inflating minor concerns, creating a completely backwards understanding of market dangers. File 5. Merger Synergy Calculations Board Presentation. Financial projections that assumed synergy savings would compound annually rather than being one-time benefits, leading to impossible efficiency gains. File 6. Competitive Intelligence Report Restricted. Market intelligence that accidentally switched data between companies, attributing competitors' strengths to the wrong organizations and creating a completely fictional competitive landscape. Each file was a masterpiece of plausible destruction. They looked sophisticated enough to impress executives during initial presentations, but contained errors that would become catastrophically obvious once implemented. More importantly, each file was tagged with invisible metadata that would track every access, every download, every forwarding. Monday morning, I arrived at the office to find Marcus already at his desk, looking unusually focused. My computer's activity logs showed exactly what had happened over the weekend. He'd accessed my system multiple times, downloading all 6 dummy files along with several legitimate analyses. He'd spent hours reviewing the materials, probably planning how to repurpose them for his own presentations. By Tuesday, I could see Marcus implementing his strategy. He'd requested an urgent meeting with our senior partners, claiming he'd developed breakthrough insights for the Phoenix Development Group account. Phoenix was considering a $37 million real estate acquisition, and according to Marcus, he had analysis that would seal the deal. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday at 2:00 p.m. Phoenix's executive team would be flying in specifically to review Marcus's recommendations. It was exactly the kind of high-visibility opportunity that could make or break a career at Meridian. Wednesday afternoon, Marcus made his final mistake. He sent me an email requesting technical support for his Phoenix presentation. Elena, I'm putting together some complex analytical models for tomorrow's meeting. Could you review my calculations to ensure technical accuracy? I'd hate for any minor errors to undermine the strategic message. He attached 6 files to the email. My 6 dummy files, now branded with his name and reformatted with his preferred styling, but otherwise unchanged in their fundamental flaws. He was actually asking me to review the very trap I'd set for him, apparently confident that I wouldn't recognize my own work. I replied within an hour, "Marcus, I've reviewed your analysis. The models look comprehensive and well-structured. I'm confident they'll serve you well in tomorrow's presentation." Every word was true. The models would serve him exactly as I'd intended. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that makes everything seem more vivid. I dressed carefully, choosing my navy blazer and silver watch, the combination that made me feel most professionally confident. Today wasn't just about exposing Marcus's theft. Today was about demonstrating the difference between competence and performance, between substance and style. The Phoenix presentation was scheduled in our main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Phoenix Development Group had sent their full executive team, CEO Robert Kellerman, CFO Sarah Martinez, and their head of acquisitions, David Chen. These were people who controlled hundreds of millions in investment capital, people who made decisions based on data and trusted analysts to provide accurate information. I positioned myself in the observation area, officially there to provide technical support if needed. Unofficially, I had a front-row seat to watch Marcus's world collapse. Marcus entered the conference room like a conquering general. His presentation setup was flawless. Branded folders for each attendee, a sleek laptop connected to multiple displays, and confidence that radiated across the room. He'd clearly spent significant time preparing, and his opening remarks were polished and compelling. "Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you represents 6 months of intensive market analysis and strategic modeling. The Phoenix development opportunity isn't just attractive, based on my comprehensive research, it's the kind of investment that defines careers." He clicked through his opening slides with practiced ease, establishing context and building anticipation. The Phoenix executives leaned forward, their body language indicating genuine interest. Marcus had their attention, and he knew it. "Now, let me walk you through the analytical framework that led to my recommendations." He opened the first dummy file. Meridian Competitive Analysis Q3 Confidential. The chart that appeared on screen looked impressive. Colorful bars showing market share data, trend lines indicating growth patterns, and percentages that suggested strong competitive positioning. Marcus began explaining the data with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been challenged. "As you can see, the target properties market segment has shown consistent growth over the past 18 months, with our competitive analysis indicating significant opportunities for market share expansion." Sarah Martinez, the CFO, raised her hand. "Marcus, this data shows remarkable growth rates. Could you clarify what time period this covers?" Marcus glanced at the screen, reading directly from the chart. "This represents Q3 data through September of this year, showing the most current market conditions." "Interesting," Sarah replied, consulting her tablet. "Because according to our internal research, this market sector actually contracted by 12% in Q3. Your data shows expansion of 31% during the same period." The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus's confident smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Well, different analytical methodologies can certainly yield varying results. The important thing is the overall trend trajectory, which clearly indicates strong growth potential." David Chen leaned forward. "Could you share your data sources? We'd like to reconcile these differences before proceeding." Marcus clicked to the next slide, hoping to move past the discrepancy. "Absolutely. In fact, my revenue projection model addresses exactly these kinds of analytical variations." The second dummy file appeared, Strategic Revenue Projections Executive Review. This chart was even more impressive than the first, showing exponential growth curves that stretched across multiple years. Marcus began explaining the projections with renewed confidence, apparently believing that impressive visuals would overcome any data concerns. "Based on my modeling, the Phoenix acquisition should generate compound annual revenue growth of 47% over the next 5 years, with accelerating returns starting in year 3. Robert Kellerman, the CEO, studied the chart for several long moments before speaking. "Marcus, I've been in real estate development for 23 years. I've never seen sustainable growth rates above 15% annually, and that's in the most optimistic scenarios. Your model shows returns that would make this the most profitable real estate investment in modern history. Conservative estimates often undervalue transformational opportunities," Marcus replied, but his voice had lost some of its earlier authority. "Conservative estimates," Sarah Martinez interrupted, "keep us from losing hundreds of millions of dollars on impossible projections. These numbers aren't just optimistic, they're mathematically implausible." Marcus was beginning to sweat despite the air conditioning. He clicked to the third dummy file, perhaps hoping that the customer acquisition analysis would provide more solid ground. Let me show you the underlying economics that support these projections. The customer acquisition cost analysis appeared, showing charts that seemed to demonstrate highly efficient client conversion rates and impressive lifetime value calculations. Marcus launched into his explanation, reading directly from the analysis I'd created. Our modeling shows that customer acquisition costs will decline over time while lifetime values increase exponentially, creating a compound effect that drives the revenue growth I showed earlier. David Chen was now openly skeptical. Marcus, according to this analysis, each customer becomes more valuable every year they're in our system, with no upper limit. That would mean our oldest customers are worth infinite value. Well, the model accounts for various factors. No, Chen interrupted. This model assumes that customer lifetime value grows at a rate faster than inflation, market growth, and economic expansion combined. It's not just wrong, it's impossible. The Phoenix executives were exchanging glances now, the kind of silent communication that happens when professionals recognize they're wasting their time. Marcus's presentation had shifted from impressive to embarrassing, and everyone in the room could feel it. Desperate to regain control, Marcus opened the fourth dummy file. Industry Risk Assessment Framework. Perhaps it would be helpful to review the risk analysis that supports these projections, he said, his voice now noticeably strained. The risk assessment chart filled the screen, showing various threat factors weighted and prioritized according to my deliberately flawed methodology. Marcus began reading the analysis, but the Phoenix team was no longer listening politely. "Stop," Robert Kellerman said firmly. "Marcus, this risk assessment lists increased market demand as a high-risk factor while categorizing economic recession as low risk. That's backwards on every possible level." Sarah Martinez was scrolling through something on her tablet. "I'm looking at the metadata on these files. Marcus, when did you create these analyses?" Marcus's face went pale. "I've been working on this comprehensive framework for several months. Because the creation timestamps show these files were all generated last weekend. More specifically, they show they were created by someone else and accessed using stolen login credentials." The room fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning. Marcus's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, like a fish gasping for air. The Phoenix executives were staring at him with expressions ranging from disgust to fury. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, consulting her tablet, "these files appear to be deliberately corrupted versions of legitimate analytical frameworks. Someone created these specifically to fail under scrutiny." David Chen stood up slowly. "Mr. Webb, are you seriously presenting falsified analysis to justify a $37 million investment?" "No, there's been a misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," Robert Kellerman interrupted, standing as well, "was thinking we could trust Meridian Consulting with this level of investment. Miss Martinez, cancel the acquisition. Mr. Chen, document everything for our legal team." "Wait, please," Marcus pleaded, his confident facade completely shattered. "I can explain." "You can explain to your management," Kellerman replied coldly. "We're done here." The Phoenix executives filed out of the conference room with the kind of controlled fury that comes from having your time wasted by fraudulent presentations. Marcus remained standing at the front of the room, staring at the screens that still displayed his borrowed lies. I waited until the Phoenix team had left the building before approaching Marcus. He was sitting alone in the conference room, his expensive suit rumpled, his perfect hair disheveled, staring at his laptop screen as if it might offer some explanation for what had just happened. "Marcus," I said, settling into the chair across from him, "we need to talk." He looked up with eyes that had lost their predatory confidence. "Elena, I suppose you're here to gloat." "I'm here to make sure you understand what just happened." I pulled out my tablet and opened the comprehensive log I'd been maintaining for months. Screenshots of his presentations using my work, timestamps showing when he'd accessed my files, video footage of him photographing my screen, email chains where he'd claimed my analyses as his own insights. "This documents every piece of work you've stolen from me over the past 6 months, I explained calmly. "The Pinnacle analysis where you inverted my conclusions and nearly cost our client $2.8 billion. The Morrison account where you presented my risk models as your strategic innovation. The Bradley merger analysis where you claimed credit for my due diligence framework." Marcus stared at the documentation, his face cycling through emotions like a broken kaleidoscope. "How did you?" I'm a data analyst, Marcus. I analyze patterns, predict behaviors, and prepare for contingencies. You've been a pattern I've been tracking for months. I scrolled to the morning's activity logs. At 8:42 a.m. today, you used my stolen login credentials to access 6 files from my personal directory. Those files were created specifically for someone like you, someone who steals work without understanding it, who mistakes confidence for competence, who believes charm can substitute for capability. You set me up. I protected myself. There's a difference. I closed my tablet and leaned back in my chair. The Phoenix deal is dead. $37 million in potential business, gone because you presented falsified analysis to investors who know the difference between substance and style. Your reputation in this industry is finished, and more importantly, everyone now knows exactly what kind of professional you really are. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. What happens now? Now you face the consequences of believing that other people's work was yours to take. I stood to leave, then paused at the door. Marcus, you're talented enough that you could have built your own reputation through your own work, but you chose the shortcut. You chose to steal from someone you thought couldn't fight back. Today you learned the difference between someone who looks competent and someone who actually is. The aftermath unfolded exactly as I'd predicted. By Friday morning, news of the failed Phoenix presentation had spread throughout Meridian. Marcus submitted his resignation before he could be terminated, citing philosophical differences with company direction. The Phoenix Development Group filed a formal complaint with our industry association, documenting the presentation of falsified data for a major investment decision. Our senior partners called me into a closed-door meeting on Monday morning. I brought printed copies of all my documentation, the theft evidence, the system logs, the video footage, and the complete timeline of Marcus's behavior. They reviewed everything in silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes about corporate liability and professional standards. Elena, senior partner Jennifer Walsh, said finally, "This represents a serious breach of professional ethics and company policy. We're grateful that you documented everything so thoroughly. I've been in this industry long enough to know that protecting your work means protecting your career," I replied. "Indeed. And your proactive approach prevented what could have been a catastrophic situation for both Meridian and our clients." The conversation that followed was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. Meridian was implementing new security protocols based on my recommendations. I was being promoted to principal data analyst with expanded authority over analytical standards and quality control. And most importantly, I was being assigned to rebuild the Phoenix relationship, presenting my real analysis to demonstrate the kind of competence they should expect from Meridian. 3 weeks later, I found myself back in the same conference room, facing the same Phoenix executives who had walked out on Marcus's fraudulent presentation. This time, I was presenting my actual analysis of their acquisition opportunity, the real data, the honest projections, the accurate risk assessment that would help them make a truly informed decision. "Miss Santos," Robert Kellerman said as I concluded my presentation, "this is exactly the kind of analytical rigor we expected from Meridian. Your assessment saved us from a very expensive mistake." The Phoenix acquisition moved forward on modified terms based on my analysis, ultimately saving them $12 million compared to the original proposal. They signed a long-term consulting agreement with Meridian, specifically requesting that I lead all their future analytical projects. As for Marcus, industry gossip suggested he'd moved to a smaller firm in another city, starting over at a significantly lower level. The professional world has a long memory for ethical failures, especially ones that cost clients tens of millions of dollars. I kept the dummy files as a reminder and a tool, not for revenge but for protection. Because in a world where performance often matters less than presentation, competence sometimes needs insurance. And sometimes the best way to deal with people who steal your work is to give them exactly what they deserve, the opportunity to destroy themselves with their own greed. The morning Marcus stole my login, he thought he was taking control. Instead, he was activating a system designed by someone who understood that true power comes not from taking what others have built, but from building something they can't take. At 8:42 a.m., Marcus Webb became a thief. By 2:15 p.m., he'd learned the difference between stolen work and actual competence. And in between, I'd proven that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people reveal exactly who they really are. The files he opened weren't just dummy documents. They were mirrors reflecting his character back at him with perfect clarity. And when the Phoenix executives saw that reflection, they made the only decision that competent professionals can make when confronted with fraud. They walked away. Marcus thought my login was his golden ticket. Instead, it became his resignation letter, written in the language of his own ethical failures and delivered to an audience that valued integrity over manipulation. Sometimes corporate justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's simply about creating conditions where people's true nature becomes visible to everyone who matters. And sometimes the most devastating revenge is giving someone exactly what they think they want, then letting them discover why they shouldn't have wanted it. He stole my login at 8:42 a.m. By close of business, he'd stolen his own future, and I'd proven that in the battle between competence and corruption, substance always defeats style. The dummy files are still there, waiting in my system like sleeping guardians. Because while Marcus was the first person to make the mistake of underestimating my preparation, he won't be the last. In a world where people mistake access for ownership, someone will always think they can take what others have built. When that happens, they'll discover exactly what Marcus learned, that some traps are indistinguishable from opportunities until the moment they close. And by then, it's already too late to escape the consequences of believing that other people's work was